The Westbrook County Courthouse buzzed with tension that Wednesday morning. Courtroom 7, with its imposing oak panels and American flag, was filled to capacity for what many considered a routine custody hearing. Judge Richard Harmon, a 63-year-old fixture on the bench for over 2 decades, adjusted his glasses as he reviewed the case file. Shanice Taylor sat nervously in the second row, her 3-year-old daughter Layla fidgeting beside her in a yellow dress with white ribbons in her hair. Shanice hadn't planned to bring her daughter to court, but her sister had called last minute with a family emergency. The custody hearing for her nephew couldn't be postponed again, not after 3 delays that Shanice suspected were deliberately orchestrated by her brother-in-law's wealthy family. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Richard Harmon," the bailiff announced. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Harmon entered, his black robe flowing behind him. Known throughout the county for his harsh rulings against low-income families, particularly in custody cases involving affluent parties, Harmon carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never had his authority questioned. As he settled into his high-backed chair, his cold gaze swept across the courtroom, pausing briefly on Shanice and Layla before moving on with apparent disinterest. "First case, Taylor versus Richardson, custody modification," he announced, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality that had masked his biases for years. What happened next would be replayed on national news for weeks. Little Layla suddenly stood up on her chair, her bright eyes wide with recognition, and pointed directly at Judge Harmon. "Bad man," she exclaimed with startling clarity. The courtroom froze. Judge Harmon's gavel remained suspended midair, his face, normally impassive, suddenly drained of color. "Control your child or leave my courtroom," he snapped, his voice carrying an unusual edge. Shanice, mortified, tried to quiet Layla, but the child wouldn't be silenced. "Bad man, Mommy," she insisted, her small finger unwavering as it pointed at the judge. "From Miss Carroll's house." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Miss Carroll was Shanice's elderly neighbor who had been watching Layla 3 afternoons a week while Shanice worked at the hospital. 2 months ago, Carroll's home had been burglarized, a crime that remained unsolved despite Carroll's insistence that personal items and family photographs had been taken. Assistant District Attorney Elena Vasquez, who had been organizing her notes for an upcoming case, watched Judge Harmon's reaction with growing interest. In her 12 years as a prosecutor, she had developed an instinct for guilt, and something about Harmon's reaction set off immediate alarm bells. "Your Honor, may I approach the bench?" Vasquez requested, her mind racing. Judge Harmon's hand trembled slightly as he motioned her forward, along with the attorneys for the custody case. As they gathered before him, Vasquez noticed beads of sweat forming on the judge's forehead, despite the courtroom's aggressive air conditioning. "This is highly irregular, Counselor," Harmon muttered, his eyes darting toward the exit door behind the bench. "Your Honor, I couldn't help but notice your reaction to the child's statement," Vasquez said carefully. "Do you know Miss Carol Thompson from Oak Ridge Apartments?" "Of course not," Harmon snapped. "I don't associate with residents from that part of town." The contempt in his voice was palpable, and Vasquez saw the defense attorney flinch at the naked prejudice. Meanwhile, in the gallery, Detective Marcus Washington had been observing the proceedings with growing interest, originally there to testify in an unrelated case. The veteran detective from Westbrook's Major Crimes Division had been investigating a series of unusual burglaries targeting elderly residents in low-income neighborhoods. The pattern had puzzled him for months. The burglar seemed interested only in personal items, photographs, letters, journals, while leaving valuables untouched. More disturbing was how the perpetrator seemed to know precisely when the homes would be empty and exactly where to find the most intimate possessions. Washington discreetly approached Shanice as Judge Harmon called for a 15-minute recess, his voice noticeably shaken. "Ma'am, I'm Detective Washington," he said quietly, showing his badge. "Would you mind telling me what your daughter meant about Judge Harmon being at Miss Carroll's house?" Shanice looked uncertain. "I don't know. Layla stays with Miss Carroll on Tuesdays and Thursdays while I work. Carroll was robbed about 2 months ago. She said someone took her family albums and some letters from her late husband." "Mommy," Layla interrupted, tugging at Shanice's sleeve. "The bad man took pictures with his phone, of Miss Carroll's pictures. He didn't see me hiding." Washington and Shanice exchanged glances. "Where were you hiding, sweetheart?" the detective asked gently. "Under the big blanket on the couch," Layla replied. "I was being a ghost." Washington nodded thoughtfully. "And you're sure the man you saw is Judge Harmon, the man in the black robe?" Layla nodded emphatically. "He has the same glasses and the shiny thing." She pointed to her collar, mimicking where a judge's pin would be. By the time court reconvened, Detective Washington had made 3 phone calls, one to his partner to check Judge Harmon's schedule against the dates of the burglaries, one to the district attorney's office requesting an emergency warrant, and one to the FBI field office where his former partner now worked in public corruption. What no one in the courtroom knew was that Judge Richard Harmon had been living a double life for years. As Washington would later discover, the respected judge had been systematically gathering blackmail material on families in low-income neighborhoods, particularly those likely to appear in his courtroom for custody battles, evictions, or criminal cases. The evidence he collected allowed him to make rulings that appeared legally sound while being based on intimate details that should never have been available to him. More disturbing was his connection to Westbrook Property Holdings, a development company owned by his brother-in-law that had been buying properties in the same neighborhoods where the burglaries occurred, properties that often became available after families lost custody battles or eviction cases in Harmon's courtroom. When court resumed, Judge Harmon appeared to have regained his composure. "In light of the disruption, I'm recusing myself from this case," he announced. "It will be reassigned to Judge Peterson." As he rose to leave, 2 FBI agents entered through the main doors of the courtroom. Judge Richard Harmon. One announced, "We have a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of breaking and entering, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations." The courtroom erupted in chaos as the distinguished judge was handcuffed and read his rights before the stunned audience. Layla, watching wide-eyed from her mother's lap, simply nodded as if confirming what she had known all along. In the days that followed, the investigation expanded rapidly. A search of Harmon's home revealed a hidden room containing thousands of photographs, personal letters, and journals, all meticulously cataloged by address and case number. His computer contained files on hundreds of families who had appeared in his courtroom, with notes on how personal information could be leveraged in legal proceedings. More disturbing were the financial records showing how properties affected by his rulings had been systematically acquired by his brother-in-law's company, then redeveloped into luxury condominiums, generating millions in profits that were partially funneled back to Harmon through a complex network of offshore accounts. The scandal rocked the judicial system to its core. 5 other judges were implicated, along with 2 prosecutors and several police officers who had helped cover up the burglaries. Over 300 cases were flagged for review, with hundreds of rulings eventually overturned. 6 months later, Shanice and Layla sat in a different courtroom, watching as former Judge Richard Harmon, now in an orange jumpsuit, was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. The new judge, Honorable Sophia Washington, the first black woman appointed to the federal bench in that district, looked directly at Layla as she delivered her statement. "The justice system exists to protect the most vulnerable among us, not to exploit them. When those entrusted with upholding the law become the lawbreakers, the damage extends beyond individual cases. It shatters public trust in the very foundation of our democracy." The investigation led to the creation of the Judicial Accountability Act, requiring transparent sentencing guidelines, prohibiting judges from having financial interests in development companies operating within their jurisdictions, and establishing the nation's strictest judicial oversight procedures. The Westbrook County Courthouse underwent a complete transformation. A civilian oversight board was established, with Shanice Taylor appointed as one of its inaugural members. Case assignment procedures were reformed to prevent judges from selecting cases that might benefit their personal interests. 1 year after Layla's courtroom declaration, a small bronze plaque was installed outside Courtroom 7. It featured a child's handprint and a simple inscription: "Truth knows no age. Justice knows no boundaries." The former Harmon's courtroom was now known throughout the legal community by a different name: Layla's Room, a constant reminder that sometimes it takes the smallest voice to bring down the largest systems of corruption. For little Layla Taylor, now in kindergarten and mostly unaware of her impact, justice was simply about right and wrong. When asked by her teacher what she wanted to be when she grew up, her answer was immediate and clear: someone who helps people tell the truth. The Layla Taylor Judicial Reform Act would eventually be adopted by 17 states, transforming how judges were selected, monitored, and held accountable. Legal scholars would later refer to the case as the catalyst for the most significant judicial reforms since the founding of the Republic. And it all began with two simple words from a 3-year-old girl who refused to be silenced: bad man.